All right. So, end of last class, we were messing with some things and looked into it some. So, what we want to look at initially here is the difference between presenting things modally and presenting and pushing view controllers. So, in effect, what we have is this. Well, I gathered that my operating system presentation stuff must be editable. That's what was happening in class today.
Oh, yeah. What did you do? Why did you find that out?
Well, that would be why that just said edited in iCloud versus edited on my MacBook. All right, so we have two ways of presenting things. Presenting interface controllers. And you might even think about this as how do we present things, how do we navigate our application? So we're going to start off with this, that all Apple Watch apps are inherently embedded inside a navigation controller. Okay, and we've mentioned what a navigation controller is in here at some level. Yay, nay, maybe. If we're not sure, let's talk about it again. So I'll come back and talk about that here in a second. So let's just do Modal right there. So navigation controller means that there is a stack of interface controllers, which are our WatchKit version of our view controllers. So, just to kind of put all our vocabulary in the same place. There's a stack of interface controllers with the root interface controller being the one that has the arrow pointed at it. That is this guy right here. See the arrow? See that, Abe? See the arrow? All right. So, Levi almost did it. I couldn't keep a straight face myself. It's like one knuckle or two. Whoa. All right. So, see, now out of context, everybody's wondering. Christian worldview. All right. So there's a stack of interface controllers with the root interface controller being the one that has the arrow pointed at it. So this is inherently created for us. Okay. When you're doing an iPhone application, you have to specify that you want a navigation controller to be involved. Okay, and I'll kind of show you evidence of this here in a second. So the idea would be when we choose to utilize this navigation controller, we push interface controllers. Just to cover my own butt, whenever I say view controller, I mean interface controller when we're talking about Apple Watch stuff. All right, it's just a synonym in our world. The reason they created something called an interface controller instead of using the built-in view controller is because they needed to make it more lightweight for the watch. So they took a bunch of the extra metal off, if you will, to make it perform a little better for the watch. At the end of the day, a view controller is the dude who controls what we see on the screen. Okay? So Watch calls them interface controllers. So one way to present interface controllers is by pushing an interface controller onto the existing stack. making it the new top of the stack, and therefore the interface controller that we currently see on the screen. All right, so that's one way of presenting a interface controller on the screen. The other way is to present it modally. Now, let me just give one more piece of information related to the push. Slides in from the side in terms of what it looks like. Modal, this slides up from the bottom in terms of what it looks like. All right, so we kind of have two different animations, if you will, associated with each of these guys. All right, so when we present something modally, we're sliding it up over whatever's currently on top of the stack. All right, so let's kind of show these two things as examples here. So I was already messing with this code a little bit, but let's, I'll do it with this D100. So this first screen here, this is our interface controller. We push the, so let's do, I'll just steal this here. So I'll go ahead and do self dot, actually, here. This is D100, it's going to push a view controller. Let's do a D20, we'll present a modal view controller. So let's get rid of that. We'll do self dot present view controller with name. We'll call this guy the table screen. Context, whatever. All right. So when I click the 100 button, we show the table screen by pushing it onto the navigation controller. When I press the D20 button, we present our table view. This will present it modally. So the 20 will make it slide up. The 100 will make it slide in from the side. That's from our initial perspective, what we'll see as being the difference. I was making a bunch of changes to this earlier, so who knows what kind of apocalyptic nightmare the state of the app is, but whatever. So D20 slides up. Okay, and I'll go ahead and cancel that. So you get an automatic cancel option for a modal presentation. D20 cancel, D100 slides in with an automatic back button. So navigation controller gives us a backwards go back button. D20 gives us a presentation with a cancel button. Shows you some information with a cancel button. So a little bit of a visual difference, right? Okay. Now from our perspective, what we were trying to do last time is I think we went from D100 to D4, takes us here, right? We'd select this guy, we'd click which one, and we wanted it to go all the way back to the beginning. Okay. I think I have it going back to the beginning now, but the way we were doing that, so that was with D100. Okay. When I click D20 and then I click D6, oh, that's not going to go to the next page because I've presented it modally. Okay, so let's look at this. Actually, yes, it's because I presented it modally, but also because I changed the way the interface storyboard works. So for right now, I'm going to take out my segues. Because even segues come in multiple. You can have a segue being either a push or a modal. So you can do this without any programming. Okay? Which is probably going to benefit us, but we're going to have to interject some stuff in between to know what we selected. So let's just get rid of all these segues right now. So right now when I click D20, we're presenting this modally. When I click D100, we're pushing it onto the screen. We need to now look at our table view example. So this guy pushes a controller with the name picker screen, and our picker screen is this guy over here. Where's my interface storyboard? Here's our picker screen. We named this guy. The identifier was picker screen. Okay. So go back into our table example. When we click on one of the rows in our table, we're going to push that controller onto our navigation controller. All right. So right off the bat, as soon as I push something onto the view controller, all of a sudden this app is being managed by a navigation controller. So that means if I hit D100, oh, I took the segues out. I need to go back to my D100. Actually, hold on a second. D20 still presents it, right? D100. Okay. Where's my D100? And this guy. Push controller with name, and it was called table screen, right? Let me make sure that's what it's called. Table screen. Let's just make sure it's getting into, oh, wait a minute. I bet. Yeah, he doesn't have his action hooked up anymore because I built in the segue. So we need to re-hook up the D100 right here. Except I need to do it more better. Right there. All right, now it should push it. Remember, we can only have one action associated with the button, and when I created the segue, it uncreated my other thing hooked up. So now that pushes it. So now when I hit D6, it pushes it. When I come here, it pops it back to the root view controller. So as soon as I engaged our navigation controller, I pushed, popped to root view controller. That gets me all the way back to the beginning without instantiating a new guy. All right, that's as opposed to doing this. Well, actually, I don't want to show you that yet, but I could have over on this last one, when I hit which one, literally pushed a new view controller called, did I give a name to this guy? Let's call this guy root view. Let's call it root interface controller. All right. So I could have pushed a new copy of root interface controller onto the stack, which would not get me back to the original one. So if I had programmatically changed the name, a label or a button name on here or something like that, I would get an original copy over here. Okay, if I had, as a response to this, pushed a brand new copy of that guy on there. But what I'm doing right now is in Picker, when I click the which one pressed, I am popping to the root view controller. I'm using this whole interface of presenting and pushing, but instead by using the navigation controller all the way through, where I push the first guy, then I push the second guy. At this point, I've done all my logic, let's say, then I pop. It goes all the way back to the beginning. If I pop just once, it'll go just back to the previous screen. All right, so instead of popping to root view controller, I can do self.pop controller, and this will just go back to the one screen previous. So it's push, pop one. That makes sense? Pop back one. I can go back then if I want to do that. That effectively did another pop. Okay? So, but if I want to go all the way back to the beginning, which is what we were trying to do last time, I can say, no matter what's happened between the original screen and where I am now, just go back to the original. Pop to the root view controller. But now, so let's do pop to root controller. And then instead of our table view, instead of pushing, let's go ahead and present. So since I'm presenting it modally, so this very first one I'm pushing. So should it slide up or slide over? Slide over. So there's the slide over. This next one I'm presenting modally. So should it slide up or slide over? Slide up. So now I select which one of these guys I want, and I hit which one. This says pop to root view controller. Can't go back to the root view controller. But if I push that guy, I can go back to the root view controller. Why is that? This comes back to the difference between presenting modally and pushing.
Displaying it separate from the stack almost.
Let me do that. It is. Exactly. That's exactly what it's doing. So let me go to the picker example and let me do the awake with context. So right now I'm printing out what the context value it got was, right? That's kind of showing how we can pass crap along, okay, which might be handy for us. But now I'm going to say something like, let's do self dot, how do I get actually to the navigation controller? I don't know if I'm going to be able to programmatically prove it to you. Yeah, I don't think we have direct access to the navigation controller. That falls in line with what I said before, where they pulled all the extra metal out to keep it. Yeah, so only real evidence is that if we say pop view controller, there is no navigation controller for us to pop anything off from the context of being a interface controller that's been modally presented. So if I'm an interface controller that was modally put on the screen, and I say pop view controller, I have no navigation controller to talk to from my context, from the world I live in. I don't belong to a navigation controller. I belong to the current screen of the application. Again, on Apple Watch, they streamline things for performance. So when you present something modally, you're actually requesting the operating system to present something without having direct access to the rest of the world, the rest of the context that's happening within your application. Kind of make sense? So punchline there being, if you want to, well, punchline being this. When should you use modal? When should you use push? Maybe that's the better question. When to use, well, let's just say modal versus stack. So modal is the one with the cancel button. When would be a good time to use modal? Realistically speaking, we probably would not choose one or the other based on whether we wanted something to slide up or slide in from the side. Kind of a vain approach, right? So if modal, it's modal. If modal shows us a cancel button, what kinds of things would we do and present a modal as that step? Go ahead.
We you don't want to go any farther than that one screen, and you don't want to go any farther back than the previous screen.
Okay, well the question is, can a modal present a modal? So let's look at that context. So if we are modally presenting, let's go back to interface controller, the first one, D20 modal, right? D20 gets our modal, and then we're on our table view, and our table view is also doing a modal already. So modals can do modals, but modals can't do pushes. Well, modals can't do pops. Can modals do pushes? Let's see, so let's try to push in our modal. Can't go anywhere. We don't have access to the stack of navigation controllers or the stack of interface controllers. So a modal can present additional modals, which can then dismiss modals, right?
Even previous ones, right? So you can call the first one, call the second one, and the second one, they get canceled, it goes back to.
Yep. So if we'll just do that. So we automatically get a cancel with it. So it's kind of like fries on the side. So D20 gives me a cancel, although I can click this, which gives me a cancel. If I hit cancel, it takes me back here. If I hit cancel, it takes me back here. That make sense? Okay, so modals can present modals, but pushes can do pushes, but can they also do modals? They know about both. So bottom line is we can always do modal presentations. But once you are inside of a modal context, you don't have access to the navigation controller. You don't know about it. So the current interface controller you're in, self, doesn't know how to access that guy. All right, so now having said that, thinking about our app from last time, when we're maybe on our main screen here and we say, okay, well, I want to add a role. So I think we were talking last time about we'd have an interface that looks kind of like this, where it shows some stored roles that we already had. And then we might have add a role, which then takes us to another screen that asks us which dice, what kind of dice are you rolling? And then the next screen which says how many of those dice are you rolling? Okay, so let's kind of paint this picture real quick. So let me go back. We'll go from the D100, let's say. So our D100 will be a push. So I would strongly encourage you to do this through pushes and pops if you want this to happen right. That's our punchline for us, right? Okay, to be able to go someplace and then ultimately get all the way back to the beginning, that's a pop to root view controller. Okay, we're not going to be able to pull that off with dismissing, 30 times in a row or something. All right, so having said that, we'll start on the first one. So when we hit D100, we'll go to the table screen, and let's kind of fake the communication here a little bit. Instead of here you go, let's say create a new role. So I'm hybridizing this with what you guys will be doing for your homework, okay? So I'm going to be this is my context, I'm going to be letting that next screen know a string at least, what I expect him to be doing. Okay? So, what's going to happen there? Well, we're going to get into that screen. That's our table. And when this guy awakes from context, we're actually not printing the context right now, but let's just print it. So we'll say print context. So the first thing we should see is, what I say, creating a role or something like that, whatever I typed 30 seconds ago that I've already forgotten. Okay, so he'll receive that string, and then he can respond to it. He can do something based on that string if we want, but what we're looking for here is that I just passed a piece of information from our first interface controller to our second interface controller. One little tiny string, that's all I had. That's all I could pass him in our current way of doing things. Okay, we're going to look at the Singleton design pattern here in a few minutes. All right, so then I go through here, I click on one of the tables. Finally, I'm going to go back to our push, okay, because that's the way we're going to do it. We're going to do it with pushes. So I'm going to push to the next screen, and we're going to let this guy maybe know which dice was pushed. So maybe we can tell him what row index, what row index was pushed, or maybe the actual D label names. So maybe I let him know self dot. It was self dot, wasn't it? Do I have my? Nah, that's fine. I can do it with sides. So I'm going to have to build a string, and so this is going to be a D backslash self dot sides bucket row index. All right, so I'll build the D6 or D8 or D12, whatever the string is that I'm letting the next guy know about. Okay, this isn't the way we're going to end up doing it, because I'm about to walk us into a wall here. Okay, but so far you're following me? All right, so now we'll go to the picker screen. And this guy is going to get that final context, so it should say D6 or D8 or D12. So let's see that. All right, so I hit D100, and this guy should be saying create a new role. Then I'll hit D8. So now this guy should be saying D8. Pass that information on. Okay, now I'll select from here. Right now I'm showing dice, but in our project we would show like 1 through, I don't know, 1,000 or something, 1 through 50, whatever is a kind of a reasonable number of, for Dungeons and Dragons. At some point, you have the one guy who's playing some, high level wizard who pulls out, a suitcase filled with D6s. Says, you count them. Game over. Something like that. So when we hit which one, right now we're popping back to the root view controller. But when we pop back to the root view controller, we don't get a context. We don't get a context here. And let's prove that. If I come in here to our interface controller, let's see. Here's our awake with context. Let me just go ahead and print. Context there. Call that root controller. Pass that context. We want to see when that gets called. Okay, so right off the bat, right here at the very beginning, it's already been called. There's my context. Has nothing. Because none of my dudes called him. Right? So nobody passed him a context. You're on your own, pal. Okay, that's essentially what it said. So then we'll go through the motions. There's that. There's a D6. We selected that one. We go back here. The last thing we had was the D6 that we passed to the last dude, which tells us that awake from context only gets called how many times? Once. It's called one time. Did not get called when we came back. That will be will activate. Okay, that guy will get called when we're coming back to the screen during the life cycle. Okay, but not awake with context is when this guy is first kind of created, first generated. So the question is how do we get a piece of information back to this guy? Let me do this. Let me try something here. Good enough for this. Let's go ahead and run this again real quick. So it will activate. I'm having it print some stuff. So first of all, notice we've already called will activate once. go here, we'll bounce back. I've called will activate again. So every single time we come back to this screen, will activate gets called. But the root controller awake with context only gets called one time when it's first born. Make sense? Okay. So the challenge we have is when I get to this screen over here and I click which one, kind of like our save button, save this new role. I need to somehow get that information back to that first screen. Okay? And this is where the Singleton design pattern comes in. So let's talk about it first. Okay, we talked about design patterns in here already, right? With MVC, Model View Controller, the whole separate your code from your code from your design, that kind of stuff. Well, Singleton just says, you know what? It's a good idea if you just keep one object someplace and throw crap in it that everybody needs to share. Okay, that's what the Singleton design pattern is. So, of course, all of us in here know how to implement the Singleton design pattern, right? How many of you suspect you probably already do, just didn't know that you called it the Singleton design pattern? Okay. Create an object, throw crap in it. Make sure everybody has access to it. Right? KK, thanks. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go up to our WatchKit app. And actually, we're going to do it in our extension. So we decided that the extension is where code lives and the app is where storyboards live, right? That kind of what we've come to the conclusion we're working off of right now. So I'm going to right click on that and, well, I'm going to actually right click on it. Do it more better this time. There we go. New file. And I'm going to add I'll go under WatchOS. We're going to add a WatchKit class to this guy. I assume we could have done a Cocoa Touch class, but whatever. We'll just do a WatchKit class. I'll hit next. And this guy's going to be a subclass of NSObject. Okay, I'm making a plain Jane object, nothing special. All right. Okay, and this guy is going to be, just for my own naming convention, let's call it Dice Roller Core. And that'll make sense here in a few minutes. Okay, and we only have to add it to the extension. All right, so here's our Dice Roller Core. All right, now what I'm going to do is there's some better object-oriented ways that we could have written this, but I'm going to create a couple of variables here. So we're going to create a static var numsize. It's going to be an int. Static var numDice is going to be an int. Okay, so two variables that are owned by the, and actually what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, I'm just going to start both these guys off at -1, and you'll see why here in a second. We're doing a little bit of a, let's say, somewhat of a ghetto version of this before we come up with like our better way of doing it. I'm just giving you enough to be able to accomplish the homework. So I have this class called Dice Roller Core, and all this guy is going to do is hold on to two pieces of information. A number of sides and a number of dice, and they're both going to start off at -1. That's my default value, is -1. Okay? So if I see -1 in there, that probably means that I haven't set it yet. Decent approach. So if I look in that bucket and say, oh, it still says -1, nobody's touched it. Okay? Now I've made these guys static. What does that mean? What did it mean in Java? Those of you who are in 250 have learned this in the last week. The rest of you should have this instilled in your soul.
Christian worldview.
What is it? Yeah, Christian worldview, brought to you by Nabisco. Okay, so what does it mean for a class member to be static?
You don't have to instantiate You don't have to instantiate the class. You just
Can't. I mean, well, abstract would mean you can't instantiate the class. A static member would mean you can't use an instance of the class to access it. You have to use the class name, class itself. The context that you have to be coming from is a class context. So we would call this guy dice roller core dot num dice, dice roller core dot num sides. That make sense? Go ahead.
Does class have to be static, or is it just based off of the fact that you have a static variable?
You can never have class being static.
Really?
It doesn't make sense.
Sure it does.
How? A class can be abstract, which means you can't create an instance of it.
But if you have a static class, then it's just essentially you're just create a hierarchy.
Oh, okay. So you're saying if you make the class static, then everything inside of the class would, by
Right.
nature, be static.
Yeah.
I don't think that's legal.
I think it is in Java.
I don't think it's legal in Java either.
Yeah, it is. I'm sure it is.
If it's legal in Java, I don't know about it.
Well, you have public static main.
That's a method, not a class name.
But I'm sure.
I would be very surprised.
Who's got a Java compiler? Come on.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible, but I'm not aware of it if that's the case. So this is the way I would write it. Because what he's suggesting, and it's not necessarily a bad language design. It's what would be cool is if I'm creating this class specifically to hold a whole bunch of static variables. Let's just make the class static so that everything inside of it just by default is static. So kind of a catch-all. Rather than writing static 30 times, you can write it once and it just covers everything, right? So, I mean, not necessarily a horrible idea, but I don't know of a language that supports it that way.
C# does.
Okay, it's possible. I've never used it in that language. So it's, as far as I know, that doesn't exist. Okay, so in any case, I've made both of these guys static, so this will work. we're safe with this approach. So now what I'm going to do is, first of all, notice. Let's access these guys real quick just so we see it. So I'm going to go into my interface controller, and instead of printing out will activate, let's go ahead and print out the value of one of those variables just to prove we have access to it. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, what did I call that guy? Dice roller core dot num dice, num sides, doesn't matter. So I'll go ahead and print out num sides. Okay. So the very first time I run this, it should say -1. Actually, every single time right now it'll say -1 because I'm never actually changing that value. But I'll see -1, kind of proving I have access to that singleton. All right, so we'll go ahead and run this. Right off the bat, he's going to check that singleton because that will activate gets called the very first time. So I'll go ahead and show that. There's our -1. So the singleton is accessible by this dude. All right. So actually, just since the next screen sets the, sets the number of sides. So let's go to our table screen. So before we push that next controller, let's go ahead and we're going to say dice roller core dot num sides is equal to, actually, yeah, this is fine, that guy. All right, so we'll go ahead and set our singleton's number of sides equal to whatever sides were clicked. All right, and we're still pushing that context thing through for no good reason, but we're passing it through, so we have it. Although by passing the context, it's a duplicate of what we've already stored in the singleton. We all kind of getting an idea what that singleton's for? Fancy schmancy name for just dude we all have access to. All right, just a global object. All right, so now we'll get into our picker example. And when we hit our button, the which one button pressed, before we pop to the root view controller, we want to go ahead and get our picker item. So let's say let's say dice roller core dot num dice is equal to, I'm gonna have to fake this a little bit, the picker dot, what is that, selected? How do I get the, we're doing it as a global variable, right? Current selected index, let's just pretend like that's the number. Okay, so we'll say self dot current selected index, so we'll set the num dice, which will then pop back to our root view controller. Okay, and then let me just go into our root view controller guy here, and let's also then print out in will activate. So let's call this num sides, and then let's call this num dice. Right? They're going to be -1 the first time, but hopefully when we come back here, they have real values. Make sense? So we'll go ahead and run this. We'll go ahead and prove that they're -1 to begin with. There's our -1s. Num sides, num dice. We'll go ahead and hit D100. That's our new roll button, if you will. We'll hit D6, so number of sides should be 6. We'll hit, that's whatever, was that 8? The index I selected, I think that's 8, maybe 6 or 7. It's one of those numbers. So we'll say which ones, now we'll come back and we see that these guys now have, num sides is 6, num dice is 6. So just to kind of prove that this actually works, I'll do this. We'll do 4, then I'll do this, which one, so we should see 4 and 6 now, just proving they are different values. All right, so I could always ask the question, if dice roller core dot num sides is equal to -1, well, let's just say it's not equal to -1, then we can do something with the values, i.e. maybe throw them in our table view, right? Something like that. Okay, now back here, let me do something here. So here, I'll just prove this to you real quick. So with our little if statements, this is something you'll want to put together for your app. D100, there's D4, scroll through, do that. They only printed out when they were a real value, not when they were -1. Okay? Now, adding something to a table view. Let's go to our table example. All right, so for right now, rather than pushing our next view controller, let's add something to our table view. All right, so right up here where we awake from context in this guy, we're building our table view, right? So we're setting the number of rows from our table with the row type. We are then taking each of those rows, setting the label, and ultimately adding them to our controller. So we're setting the number of rows, we're grabbing a blank row, filling in all the rows that used to be there. So how do we actually fill our table view? Well, when we tell our table view how many rows it has, so let's just do this. Let's go ahead and we'll set num size. So let's set the number of rows to be, let's just do it for the sake of argument, 20. All right, so by default, these are now all blank rows. So if I run this app, as soon as I click on something, Let's see what happens to our table view. All blank rows, 20 of them. Okay, so what does that tell us? It tells us that as soon as we set the number of rows that go into a table view, we're now dealing with a blank table view, and therefore we'd have to rebuild the contents of that table view from scratch. That make sense? Which means that when you get back to that main screen, and you now know that we have to add 2d6, for example, to our main table view, we're going to have to probably add that string to some global array that we have, then set our table view's number of rows to the length of that new array, which should be one bigger than it used to be, then go through, fill our table up with all that stuff from scratch, not just add the one additional thing. That make sense? Now, just out of curiosity, just want to do something here. I am going to teach you guys about observers before too long. It's actually really cool. We'll talk about the observer design pattern. I just want to, yeah, I can insert. It looks like we can insert a row. So technically I could do this. Self.table.insert rows at index. Oh no, that's going to allow me to do multiple rows. For right now, let's just pretend like we're not going to do that. That's if we have a collection of new rows. Let's just build a table from scratch. That'll be good enough for what we're doing right now. Make sense? So for your homework, build this app. That is an app that has a table view of all your collected rows. Initially, it should be empty. Has an add button. When you hit the add button, it takes you to a screen that allows you to select the kind of dice and how many of them. When you hit done, it takes you back here and should show that new dice that you just built, that new roll on your table. And then you should be able to select something on the table and then click roll. All right, or if you prefer, you can just select it and have it roll. But either way, you can select it and keep track of when index was last selected and then hit the roll button, or you could just click it and it actually rolls. I don't care what you do. Make sense? Ultimately, you need to be able to roll. And you need to be able to roll this many of these guys. One last thing that you'll probably find helpful. I'll just throw it in the last second of our video here. This, do this. Let's say we have var s is equal to 2d6, something like that. I can do s, actually, what's it called? Split. That'll do it too, but that's not the one I was necessarily looking for. So that'll separate on, well, hold on. Let me just look at the one I was going to tell you about. I know we're out of time. Go ahead and you can pack up, but Swift separate string on delimiter. It's a global function. Oh, it's components separated by string. It's components separated by string. That's what I want. So I can say I want to do it on D, and this will give me var AR is equal to that, and then I can say print AR at bucket 0, print AR at bucket 1. That'll give me my 6, or my 2 and my 6. Make sense? That'll give you your pieces. All right, so that'll allow you to actually do the rolls.
Why is it complaining about 2d6?
Wait, because you don't use it at all?
Because I haven't changed it. It wants me to make it a let.
So wait, then so the separated by string, that means that it only gives you the things
Before and after. It pretends like the D is just part of the syntax, not the. Yep. So if I roll this, if I run this, I'll get 2 and 6.
So you're separating on the D.
I was feeling it. I was
And then
feeling it.
would it be cheating if I instead
There's
of-
the 2 and 6.
Okay. The table. Couldn't you just put the table in the global class thing and then just update that instead of okay.
Yeah. Yeah. If you wanna run with this Singleton idea, go with it. That's fine.